My beloved child, stop for a moment, because there is something about your soulmate that you may not have noticed yet, and once you hear the reason behind it, you may understand why certain moments between you have felt so strangely unfinished. You thought you were simply waiting for a message, a conversation, a sign, or perhaps one honest sentence that would finally explain everything, but what if the silence itself has been hiding a story? Your soulmate may have been carrying words they never found the courage to say, and the most surprising part is that those words may not be what you expect. There is a reason this message begins with, "You're not allowed to skip this," because somewhere in the story of your connection, something important was left unsaid. Maybe there was a moment when they almost reached out, almost admitted what was happening inside their heart, almost revealed what they truly thought about you. And then something made them stop. That unfinished moment matters. Because when someone repeatedly returns to the same person in their thoughts, even after trying to move forward, there is usually an emotional question that has never been answered. And your soulmate may have one question they have been asking themselves again and again: why can't I completely let this person go? You may have believed they forgot you. You may have assumed their silence meant they stopped caring. You may even have wondered whether everything you felt was one-sided. But there is another possibility, and this is where the story becomes much more interesting. What if the distance between you has not erased the connection but exposed what was underneath it? What if the quiet moments have forced your soulmate to recognize something they could easily ignore when you were closer? And what if the thing they are finally beginning to understand is exactly what they were unwilling to admit before? There is one detail you need to remember as this unfolds: people can hide words much more easily than they can hide patterns. A person can say, "I'm fine," while their mind keeps returning to one particular memory. They can act completely unaffected while a familiar song, place, date, conversation, or even a simple phrase suddenly reminds them of someone they tried not to think about. Your soulmate may have experienced one of those moments recently, and it may have surprised them because the memory did not arrive with sadness, it arrived with clarity. Suddenly, something about you looked different in their mind. They remembered the way you understood something without being told. They remembered a conversation they once dismissed as ordinary. They remembered a moment when you were there for them without demanding anything in return. And perhaps most importantly, they remembered something they said or did that they now wish they could revisit. That is where the emotional tension begins. Because sometimes a person does not realize the value of a connection while they are standing inside it. They understand it later, when life becomes quieter and there is no longer anyone distracting them from their own thoughts. Your soulmate may be entering that kind of realization now. Not because some magical force is controlling their choices, but because time has given them a perspective they did not have before. And there may be one particular truth they have been slowly approaching: you were not simply another person who passed through their life. You left behind a question they still cannot answer. Why did this connection feel different? Why did certain conversations stay in their mind? Why did your absence become noticeable in places where they expected to feel nothing? And why, after everything that happened, does part of them still wonder what could have happened if they had been more honest? But wait, because the biggest revelation may not be about what your soulmate feels today. It may be about what they finally understand about you. There is a possibility they once misunderstood your silence. Maybe they thought you were losing interest when you were actually protecting your heart. Maybe they interpreted your distance as rejection when you were simply waiting for sincerity. Maybe they assumed you would always be there, always available, always ready to explain yourself, and when you stopped chasing clarity, they suddenly had to face the space your absence created. That space can reveal things people never noticed before. Your soulmate may now be realizing that you were never asking for perfection. You were asking for honesty. You were never demanding that everything become easy overnight. You were looking for something real enough to be worth building. And there is a huge difference between those two things. Perhaps they spent too much time trying to figure out what you wanted while avoiding the more uncomfortable question, what do I actually want? That question can change everything. Because if their answer keeps leading back to you, they can no longer blame confusion forever. And this is where you need to pay attention, because the next part of this story is not about some dramatic fantasy where everything suddenly becomes perfect. It is about a person reaching a point where pretending becomes harder than admitting the truth. Your soulmate may be approaching a conversation they have rehearsed privately more times than you realize. They may not know exactly how to begin. They may worry that too much time has passed. They may wonder whether you would even listen anymore. But beneath all of those thoughts sits one uncomfortable possibility: what if you are still the person they wish they had been more honest with? And here is the part you absolutely should not miss, because the hidden truth may be smaller and more powerful than any grand declaration. Your soulmate may not be preparing to say something complicated. They may simply want to explain why they acted the way they did. Why they pulled away. Why they became quiet. Why they sometimes seemed interested and then distant. Why they left certain feelings hanging in the air instead of giving them a name. There may have been something happening inside them that they never knew how to communicate. Maybe they were afraid of making the wrong decision. Maybe they were overwhelmed by the depth of their own feelings. Maybe they did not believe they were ready for the kind of connection they sensed with you. And now they may be looking back and realizing that avoiding the conversation did not make the feeling disappear, it only made the unanswered question grow louder. That is why this moment matters. Not because you should wait around endlessly, but because there is a difference between waiting for someone and finally understanding what their silence meant. Your soulmate's next move, if it comes, may carry more weight than you expect because it could be connected to everything they never explained before. And there is one final thought I want you to hold on to before this part ends. Sometimes the person who seems the most distant is the person privately trying to understand why they still feel emotionally connected after all this time. You may think the story ended when the conversation stopped. Your soulmate may be realizing that the conversation never truly ended, it simply paused at the one sentence neither of you was ready to say. And that sentence is closer to being spoken than you think. The silence between you may have been saying more than either of you realized, because sometimes the most important shift happens long before anyone sends a message or speaks a single word. Your soulmate may have reached a point where memories of you are no longer random flashes. They are becoming questions. Why did they feel so understood around you? Why did they notice your absence more than they expected? Why do certain little things still bring you back into their thoughts? And most importantly, why does the idea of completely moving on feel strangely incomplete? This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Your soulmate may have spent time trying to convince themselves that what happened between you was simply timing, circumstances, or an emotional chapter that had already closed. But the more distance they gained, the more clearly they could examine what actually happened. They may have realized that some of their behavior was not caused by a lack of feeling at all. It came from not knowing what to do with those feelings. And that distinction changes everything. Imagine realizing that the person you thought you had forgotten is still the person you instinctively want to tell certain things to. Imagine opening your phone with a thought, remembering who you used to share those thoughts with, and suddenly feeling that familiar pull toward a conversation that never happened. That could be the private battle your soulmate has been facing. Not some dramatic fantasy, but a very human struggle between what they once tried to suppress and what they now cannot easily ignore. They may be discovering that you became part of their emotional vocabulary. Certain experiences remind them of you. Certain lessons make them think of something you once said. Certain moments make them wonder how you would react. And when someone reaches that point, they may start asking themselves a question they avoided for a long time. If I had one honest conversation with this person, what would I finally say? But there is another layer, and this one could explain why their behavior may have seemed confusing. Your soulmate may have been watching from a distance, not necessarily because they wanted to play games, but because they were trying to understand whether the door to your life was still open. They may have wondered whether you had changed. Whether you still cared. Whether you would recognize the person they are becoming now compared with the person you knew before. They may even have imagined different ways of approaching you, then rejected each one because they did not know how you would respond. One moment they feel ready to reach out, and the next they remember everything that was left unresolved. They may think, what if they ask me why I disappeared? What if they ask what I actually wanted? What if I finally have to tell the truth? That is where hesitation becomes powerful. Because reaching out is easy when there is nothing meaningful at stake. But when someone knows that one conversation could change the emotional direction of an entire connection, even a simple message can feel enormous. Your soulmate may not be afraid of you. They may be afraid of what honesty would require from them. They would have to stop hiding behind vague explanations. They would have to admit where they were confused. They would have to acknowledge moments when they could have treated you differently. And perhaps the hardest admission of all would be this: I cared more than I allowed you to see. That sentence can completely change the meaning of the past. Suddenly, the cold moments do not look quite as simple. The distance does not feel quite as final. The unfinished conversations become more significant. And the person you thought had moved on may actually be standing at the edge of a realization they cannot keep postponing. Now listen carefully, because this is where you should not mistake emotional intensity for a guaranteed outcome. The real power of this story is not that someone is magically destined to return. The power is that your soulmate may finally be confronting their own truth instead of expecting you to decode their behavior. And that is a major difference. You should never have to spend your entire life translating silence. You should never have to build an entire relationship from hints and assumptions. If your soulmate truly has something to say, eventually those feelings have to become clear words and consistent actions. That may be exactly what they are beginning to understand. Perhaps they once believed that simply feeling something was enough. Now they may be realizing that genuine connection requires courage, communication, and responsibility. They may remember moments when you were patient with them, moments when you gave them opportunities to be honest, moments when you waited for clarity that never arrived. Looking back, they may see those moments differently. Maybe you were not asking for too much. Maybe they were offering too little. Maybe you were not being difficult. Maybe you were simply tired of carrying the emotional weight of two people. And that realization can be uncomfortable because it forces someone to look at their own choices without excuses. Your soulmate may be discovering that if they ever speak to you again, they cannot simply return with the same old version of themselves and expect the same response. They would have to bring something different. More honesty. More maturity. More clarity. More willingness to actually listen. And perhaps that is the surprising change happening inside them right now. They are not merely wondering whether you still love them. They may be wondering whether they have become the kind of person capable of loving you properly. Then comes the moment that could explain why this message feels so personal. There may be something your soulmate wishes they could tell you about the time when they seemed completely unaffected. They may say that their calm exterior was not the complete story. They may admit that they thought about you more than they showed. They may confess that there were moments when they wanted to reach out but stopped themselves because pride, uncertainty, or fear of rejection took over. They may reveal that they noticed when you became quieter. They noticed when you stopped trying to force conversations. They noticed when your energy changed from, "I need an answer," to, "I need peace." And that change may have affected them more deeply than you realize. Because when someone becomes accustomed to receiving your attention and suddenly realizes that your attention is no longer guaranteed, they are forced to confront what they actually valued. Your soulmate may have discovered that they did not simply miss your presence, they missed the version of themselves that existed when they felt understood by you. That realization can be powerful. It can make someone revisit old conversations, old choices, old opportunities. It can make them wonder whether they walked away from something valuable because they were not ready to recognize it. And perhaps that is the revelation that has been quietly building beneath everything. Your soulmate may no longer be asking whether you mattered. They may already know that you did. The question now is whether they are brave enough to acknowledge it openly. So if this story has felt strangely familiar, do not rush to fill in the blanks with assumptions. Let the next chapter reveal itself through what is actually said and done. Because the most powerful part of any reunion is not hearing, "I missed you." It is hearing the truth behind why they left, why they stayed away, what changed inside them, and what they would do differently now. And your soulmate may be getting closer to that exact conversation, the conversation where the mystery finally becomes words. Something has changed in the way your soulmate remembers you, and this may be the detail you never expected to matter so much. Before, they may have remembered specific moments, the conversations, the laughter, the pauses, the little things you said without thinking twice. But now, they may be remembering how they felt around you. That difference is enormous. A memory can fade when it is attached only to an event, but an emotion can return unexpectedly when life creates a similar moment. Your soulmate may be meeting new people, having new conversations, experiencing new situations, and somewhere in the middle of an ordinary day, they suddenly recognize something they once experienced with you. Maybe someone listens in a similar way, but it does not feel the same. Maybe someone makes them laugh, but the connection does not carry the same depth. Maybe they have a conversation that should have been meaningful, yet afterward they find themselves thinking about the person who once made even simple conversations feel important. That is when comparison begins, not necessarily because they are searching for your replacement, but because their own heart has created a reference point. And you may have become that reference point without ever realizing it. Your soulmate may have discovered that the qualities they once overlooked are now the exact qualities they notice most. Your patience. Your emotional honesty. Your ability to understand what they meant even when they struggled to explain themselves. The way you could make them feel seen without demanding that they perform for your attention. Those details may have seemed ordinary when you were close, but distance has a strange way of turning ordinary moments into priceless memories. And now your soulmate may be asking themselves something they never expected to ask: did I recognize what I had while I still had it? That question can stay with someone. It can follow them through quiet evenings, through busy days, through moments when everything appears completely normal. Because the truth is, you can distract yourself from a person, but it is much harder to escape the lessons that person left behind. There may also be one specific memory your soulmate keeps returning to, and the surprising part is that it may not be the most romantic moment between you. It could be something incredibly simple. A sentence you said. A look you gave them. A moment when they were struggling and you noticed before they explained anything. Perhaps you told them something they did not want to hear but needed to hear. Perhaps you encouraged them at a moment when they secretly doubted themselves. Or perhaps you simply stayed present when they expected you to walk away. At the time, they may not have understood how significant that moment was. But now, with distance between you, they may be seeing it differently. They may realize that what made your connection unusual was not one spectacular event. It was the accumulation of small moments that quietly built emotional meaning. And this is where your soulmate may feel conflicted. Because remembering the good parts also means remembering the moments they could have handled better. They may remember times when you tried to understand them and they gave you very little to understand. They may remember when you were waiting for clarity and they responded with uncertainty. They may remember opportunities to communicate that they allowed to disappear. And perhaps they now understand why you eventually became quieter. Not because you stopped caring, but because caring without clarity can become exhausting. That realization can hit harder than any dramatic confession. It can make someone understand that the person they thought was simply walking away may actually have been protecting something precious inside themselves. Your soulmate may now recognize that you were never asking them to be flawless. You were asking them to be real. And if they have grown since then, they may finally understand the difference between being emotionally attached to someone and being emotionally responsible toward them. But there is something even more unexpected happening beneath that realization. Your soulmate may be wondering whether you still see them as the person they used to be. They may fear that the version of them you remember is the version that disappointed you, confused you, or left too many questions unanswered. And perhaps they are right to wonder, because people change. You have changed too. The person who once waited for an explanation may not be the same person anymore. The person who once needed reassurance may